Can you say something?
Okay. So now I say something and but can you hear it? I'm not sure.
We're checking whether it's going on YouTube.
Well, the people will have to quiet down at one point. Okay.
May I ask everyone to take a seat, please? Hey, please, everyone. Please, everyone, can you go and take a seat, please, as we are going to... Can I ask you to please go and take a seat? TBLT community, I have to spare my voice. Dear everyone, please be seated. So, a very short announcement. Please remember that after this plenary, before lunch, we would like to take a group picture. So please follow everyone outside and on the stairs just in front of the Academy building. We would like to take a big picture of the group as a whole. But before that, I am extremely honored and excited to have Professor Dr. Detmar Meurers from the University of Tübingen and the Leibniz Institute for Wissensmedien with us today as a final plenary speaker. He will be presenting to us some of his many projects on using AI tools for educational purposes under the title Connecting AI-supported individual practice to task-supported classroom. At this point, let me also thank the Jantina Tammes School for Digital Society, Technology and AI here at the University of Groningen that gave financial support for this talk. And I hope that we do have some of the members in the audience today. Welcome, Jantina Tammes. Back to Detmar. He studied linguistics, computer science and psychology at the University of Tübingen in the south of Germany. He stayed there to do his PhD in computational linguistics, a degree that in 1999 is a sign of pioneering instinct, something that really characterizes Detmar. From 2001, he worked at Ohio State University, where he co-developed the computational linguistics track of the PhD program. And as of 2008, he returned to Germany when he was appointed to the chair of theoretical computational linguistics at his alma mater in Tübingen. And last year, he took over the lead of the Language and AI in Education lab at the Institute für Wissensmedien. Throughout his career, Detmar has remained a pioneer, in particular by combining his strong foundation in theoretical linguistics and his computer linguistic skills with a genuine conviction that linguists need to support language education, in particular second language acquisition, subject-specific and subject-specific language. Detmar is what we call in German a Tausendsasser, a person who does a million things and you wonder how and when he does it. As a computer linguist, he has developed at least a dozen of educational applications or intelligent call systems, often with creative acronyms like FLAIR, a search engine that lets you tailor the search results according to the CFR level, so from A1 to C2. Or VERTI, an iCall prototype for generating activities based on web pages selected by the learner. Or Feedbook, an interactive workbook for English foreign language teaching. What characterizes Detmar's work is that he brings his tools into schools. He is well known by the Ministry of Education of Baden-Württemberg, the German state he lives in, as he develops tools for real-life education and thus evaluates their effectiveness with randomized field trials and hundreds of children that provide learning analytics from real classrooms and data from ecologically valid learning processes and products. I was lucky enough to cross his path already in 2014 at a workshop at Lancaster University, where we soon found common ground in our interest to improve language education. What hooked me was his openness to new ideas. I think up till then you were pretty unfamiliar with TBLT and task-based language teaching, but like a sponge, he asked questions and wanted to know everything about it, which meant that soon thereafter, we started collaborating by combining his expertise in computational linguistics with knowledge of Akira Murakami as a corpus linguist, Dora Alexopoulos as a theoretical linguist, and me bringing in a task-based perspective. When working with Detmar, you will soon notice that he not just has plenty of ideas, but will always find ways to get somehow finances for you to come and visit, to find a research assistant or convince a student to work on the project as part of their thesis. In all this, he is open, genuine, and very uncomplicated. I remember an extremely hot summer day in Tübingen where we were discussing our next paper, and because it was so hot, you brought out buckets of cold water so we could put in our feet to stay cool. Detmar is an avid swimmer, so if you get a chance to visit him at Tübingen between April and October, be sure to bring your gear so you can join him at 8 o'clock in the morning to do a few leaps in the open pool of the city. He is also a dedicated and proud father of 3 children who share his genuine interest, his openness, and his curiosity, and the interest also to travel the world. His unstoppable energy is something you will notice within a few minutes when you start talking to him. He is full of brilliant ideas, which he shares in a speed of delivery that I'm not sure an automatic speech recognition program would be able to transcribe. Maybe you've developed it already, I don't know. I'm sure he will give you a chance to experience that right now. So without further ado, Detmar, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mariah. I think this was the kindest introduction I've ever had. I hope you won't be disappointed. Because we only have 45 minutes, so these different projects that she mentioned, what I decided to start with is actually school education. And as you can see in the title here, Connecting IS-supported individual practice, what I tried to do is pull together the different things to show what would be options for integrating the vision that TBLT has, very often kind of still in an amateuric way integrated into our work, but then what role could AI play? Because I think we need to shape how this is done rather than waiting for the next ChatGPT release. And so that's very important to me, because when you look at LinkedIn or different contexts right now, AI is flooding the world. And I think what you guys here in the audience know very often is not in the systems that are currently flooding the world. So I want to make that connection. And I try to show you different ways of doing it, and that's the selection. So Flair, unfortunately, won't be featured, even though it's still online. Okay, but I wanted to start with school children, because something that struck me when I was a professor in the US, we did have Portuguese individualized instruction at the university. It's easy to access these students because they're there at your university. But then coming to Germany, I realized, and in Europe, 34.4 million children in secondary school are learning English, and 24.4 million are learning more than one foreign language. And when I looked at my children, the way they were taught was not much different from the way I was taught in, a couple of years ago. So at the same time, there has been an amazing amount of SLA research. And that's why I really enjoyed meeting Mariah, because she showed me the richness of work. For example, Michael Long's, you'll see two Michael Long's, one is his dissertation and the other is another paper. This is his dissertation, where he talks about SLA as a multidimensional phenomenon involving at least biological, neurological, social, psychological, affective, and personal variables, plus the effect of instruction. And Robert de Keyser pointed out, it's important to study the interaction between all these individual differences, the treatments and the structures. But the problem is, where do you get the data to do this? Because you need a lot of data to look at these factors and the interactions. And that's where I come in a sense, with having studied, when I studied at the end of the 80s, the connection between linguistic psychology and computer science was non-existent. There was people talking about cognitive science, but we were following 3 different degrees, basically, and there was no connection. So I was really pleased when I then realized that what we can do is we can try to observe things in reality by supporting people in reality. So it's possible to connect fundamental research, which used to be different. It was first research, then you do transfer. But now, to do real research with ecologically valid data, with authentic school context, you need digital means to access that data, because you can't be in every classroom at the same time. And so we'll see that plays quite an important role. And I think AI methods are a way to facilitate basic foundational research into interactions of individual differences, instructions, and we'll see also tasks. But that's really, in a sense, now the puzzle piece where you will be able to put a lot of interesting pieces into the puzzle that I'm showing you. We've only started. Okay, but when you hang out, so I came to Tübingen, and then I met people that didn't realize existed before, namely empirical educational scientists. So they're a new brand of scientists in Germany after PISA. They decided, or with PISA, that you can study what happens out in schools. And what had already been known for a long time is that learners do differ substantially. Now we're outside of SLA, we're really just in education. It's generally accepted that they differ in language competence, cognitive characteristic, interest and motivation, socio-cultural background, and that Jürgen Baumert, the guy who organized the first PISA study in Germany, he said, improving the way we deal with heterogeneity is probably the central challenge for modernizing the education system. So keep that in mind. We're not just talking, SLA is what I will be talking about concretely, second language, foreign language, and also language of schooling. That also is part of what I will be talking about, but not all the education system. But what we're trying to tackle is really part of a challenge in the overall education system, which means that if we now look at teachers, then we have a problem to solve. The German educational system and that of some other countries is in dire trouble. We have dire need of support. So when you study teacher education and when you look at what teachers perceive as difficult, then in the study, for example, by Kunz and Solzbacher, which is only one of many studies I could add here, most teachers, almost over 90%, say supporting each student is the most important goal for me. But 90% of the people who say that say it's impossible to do it in practice, and they do not feel up to it. There's not enough time for diagnostics, there's not enough time for differentiation, there's not enough time for feedback, and so on. So we have a problem to address. And that's something I always tell when I usually come to some ministry meeting and they, oh, you're Mr. AI in education. I say, I want that button also on my chest of the ministry. And I say, I don't do digitality, I try to solve problems. I try to address school issues. And these are there's a lack of adaptive materials, time, competence for diagnosis, learning activity selection, and here I call them learning activities because these are practice and what you would call tasks, and scaffolding of the learning process. So how can we help teachers and learners to overcome this problem that's a real life problem in schools? That's why I start in schools. Politicians have talked about this for a long time. 2017, they said digital media, these are KMK, that's Culture Ministry Conference of Germany, hold great potential for shaping new teaching and learning processes, especially when considering the possibility for individual support for pupils. Well, yeah, but what has happened in the last decade on this? The schools in Germany still look very much like they looked before, except that now very often they actually have Moodle or something like this because of Corona. So Corona, in a sense, was the greatest boost for German schools because it forced people to come up with some ways to access, to interact with their students in digital ways. So what we want to try is, and you'll see later on how this interacts with, how this connects to task-based teaching, because I think there's a division of labor between digital tools in support of learners so that the teachers then can be most effective in the classroom. So I will mostly be focusing on individual support because it's a precursor, as you'll see, of joint communicative tasks in the class. So when do you think this says Revolution im Unterricht, revolution in teaching. So when do you think the Spiegel cover appeared? What do you think? 85. So already in 1985, there was a revolution, except that, typical for Germany, it didn't happen. And but keep that in mind, because now AI comes in, and then I translate this. This is the KI at school, so AI at School initiative of Bavaria, and they think the most important thing of AI is, wir müssen anders denken lernen. We have to think different. Aha, was that the problem the teachers were reporting about before? Not quite. And keep in mind also, you need to have here, this guy. It's important to have a red vest and a pantau hat, right? I mean, otherwise, you're not the revolution, the disruption kind of. Do we need disruption? No, we need better teaching and learning. And then look at this digital teacher. So we need somebody white and has a chalk and puts cool mathematical formulas on a chalkboard, and that is the digital teacher, right? Is that the vision, how AI will support education? And that, looking around the media, and you'll be struck by how often you've got robots in the classroom where we've got the teacher. The problem is not teachers in classrooms, the problem is kids supporting their learning when the teacher is not around, because we don't have individual peers supporting learning. If we had a teacher per person, we wouldn't need AI. Then we have HI, called human intelligence. Okay, so what is actually then needed to adaptively support language learners? Keep in mind, I think there's a real danger that politicians and also some practitioners think that AI is a kind of deus ex machina that somehow is capable of everything. Even professors who work in this area, I've said, this and this doesn't work. And he said, well, wait for the next release. I have 4.0 already, and it's much better. Well, okay. But keep in mind, for clear reasons, this cannot possibly be the solution. Large language models, like ChatGPT, they're trained to be language imposters. They're amazing in their language production abilities, but they're not optimized to be tutors. And when you then look at what they use as language in terms of foreign language exposure, this is work Benedetto et al., that's the group in Cambridge, computational group, they show that large language models as such do not validly capture SAFR levels in learner proficiency, nor in reading materials to adapt them. So yes, they do everything amazingly in language, but there's very little control of the language they use when you want to use it as a learning device. So you cannot just use it for input enrichment, input enhancement, and so on out of the box. SLA research then is essentially needed, because what is developmentally proximal? Well, there's no learning process in LLMs, right? So how could it possibly know? Also, what learning activities, what didactics, what scaffolding? There's different SLA strands, right? I mean, recast when you talk to Allison, and then there's explicit meta-linguistic feedback, and then there's all kind of feedback, motivational feedback. Which type of feedback, which type of input, noticing, out feedback types, interaction, and tasks will support which learner towards which learning goals? None of that is modeled in large language models. It's not part of it. It cannot, in the next release, suddenly appear. You have to put it in there. You have to design tools to do what they want. We need assessment research, SLA research, and didactics to really play a role And it's our job to tell the technically engaged people to help us do that. Okay, so on this basis, then the AI method have a clear role. It's not like anything goes, but we can automatically analyze language in the activities and the learner responses. So the input of learning and the output production of learning. We can build learner models that reflect the individual skills and competencies as they develop, so learning process analytics. And we can then adaptively select or generate, selecting with Flair search engine, or generate learning activities in learning paths towards curricular goals. So we typically start with curricular goals because it's impossible to do randomized controlled field study in school if you don't satisfy what the teacher thinks they have to teach. And the teachers really in Germany want to reach the goal of the class in terms of curricular goals. Okay, so now comes the interesting part where I sat there and thought, okay, so how do these different AI approaches we've been working on relate to TBLT? Because we then worked on data, so our joint work is a lot on the impact of tasks on linguistic complexity analysis. So it's not so much about tools, it is about insights gained through, thanks to Mariah, we had parameters that we could see, how do they impact task parameters, the different language properties produced. So here, I then figured I want to teach about supporting teaching and learning. So let's start with something we worked on a lot, intelligent tutoring systems, and explain their role. Because first, I always connected it with Robert de Keyser's work. That was our starting point. Practice, you all know it, declarative knowledge, practice, proceduralization, automated behavior, that kind of idea. It fits well with German schools because they have workbooks. So we automated the workbooks, gave kids immediate feedback, and that was our first randomized controlled study. And it shocked me that something that was published in 2019 was the first randomized controlled field study ever in German schools, full year, supporting real-life language teaching. How is that possible? We've had intelligent tutoring systems for 30 years. Not me personally, you know, I didn't always have gray hair, but even then, my first tutoring system was in 2006, right? So, but 30 years in Cambridge, in Carnegie Mellon University, you may know their work on tutors, in particular in the domain of math, but in Germany, they hadn't caught on. Then, now comes the task, you know, Mariah's task. Tell us about how this fits into task. So we'll take one short step that Cordula Decuti already teasered from practice to task. Do practice skills actually transfer to free production, what we call task? Now I would formulate this slightly differently, but free production language. And then something that I think is more important, what does practice have to do with tasks? How do you integrate them as pre-task activities to practice into a TBLT classroom so that there's a division of labor between what the teacher does with the children that have practiced in a sense, and the children can be fostered to then participate, and does it help children to have task orientation as a motivation of their practice? So that's something we tried in another randomized controlled field trial and compared it with gamification. Gamification is one of these hip things like put an avatar there, make them collect stars. And so you're going to see TBLT play against gamification. And I hope, you know, that'll put you in your seat and kind of, I hope we win, I hope we win. Okay, let's see. And then I'll talk briefly about input tasks, facilitating task-driven vocabulary learning. So I want to do something, input task, and give me what I need to be able to do what I want to do, a real task, read a book, read a novel. And then I'll talk about dialogues, where I show a little bit of a progression. Ken Peterson's dissertation that was jointly advised with Alan Mackey, he finished in 2010, but he took 8 years to do this dissertation. It's an amazing dissertation. Unfortunately, after that, he went to the testing industry and didn't even publish this. So I want to alert how amazing this work was that Ken Peterson did, and then 2 current pieces very shortly at the end. Okay, now, Cordula already mentioned this. We started with the way school is, because otherwise, how can you put your technology into the class if you start way out there and you don't help them do what they try to do? These kids, I talked to this kid, and he told me, for example, here, why did you stop there? Well, there was the page end, right? So, and so the point is they fill out some kind of grammar-based exercise, and it's unclear, why am I doing this? What is it helping me do? And the point is, let's fill the line. And you're not going to raise your hand when you discuss it 2 weeks later, because then the teacher may find out you didn't do it right, and you better stay quiet. That's what the kid said. Okay, so with the technology, while working on it, you would have immediately gotten feedback, in this case, metalinguistic feedback, that we work with teachers, and these teachers teach these classes, not all the classes, obviously, but we have 3 teachers employed in our project, half time on the project, half time in the classes. And then they tell us, in my class, I would use this kind of metalinguistic terminology. Another PhD could be written by, if anyone's interested, I actually do have currently open positions. Anyone who wants to work on, for example, different feedback types in randomized controlled field trials, intelligent tutor systems, come see me after the talk. I'd be very happy to have a dissertation on this. Okay, but just very briefly, there's practice of language forms. So this is exercises, this is not tasks, but it's at least partly meaning-based. Off to Greece again, not in this kind of beautiful weather. You can also stay in the Netherlands. But here, you try to make sense of the tickets, aircon or expensive than at midair, the kid writes, and immediately then the system says, this is kind of rule-based scaffolding. When an adjective has 3 or more syllables, we form the comparative with more and the superlative with most. We never give the solution, and we never say right, wrong, but we give them what we hope will lead to an understanding of what they need to do. This is more interesting, perhaps, because it is kind of reading comprehension task. And this was solved in the way that some presidents in the way think all you have to say is it's great. It's always correctly, it's always grammatically correct. But when you look at it, it's great, huh? Wilding school would be great because it's great. What should the system now say? It hopefully doesn't say, well done, it's a grammatical sentence of English. What it instead says is there seems to be important information missing in your answer. So it's meaning-based feedback, which is not quite really on task because what was the real world thing I want to do? Why did I care about this? That's not yet in it, but at least it is trying to guide the attention of the learner to the place where they need to find something. Then they look up there, here his sister went to Wildings. Okay, his sister goes there. And now the system provides this. We're talking about something that happened in the past. Please use the simple past, not simple present. So this is a kind of incidental focus on form. You were trying to do something that required a meaning component, but then in your production, the system alerted you of a form aspect, which you then can still correct. And this is now, in a sense, what I would call a pre-task phase. It is and you'll see in a second why I call it pre-task phase. The kids are working with the system to familiarize themselves with the forms and the way to use them to make sense, to convey meaning, but it is not yet task embedded. There's not yet a functional real need. Why should I do it? So first thing I need to tell you is how can we embed a system into real life? And that's a bit of a problem because this morning in a session, it was also asked, is it ethical to do something that you know will advantage some and disadvantage others? So how can you do it? And the first thing you have to do is you have to cover what they need to learn. You cannot go into class and say, I teach you X, but you have to say what is being taught in this class and they need to cover it all. Because otherwise the teacher is not flexible enough to use the system when they can use the system. And you need to formulate research questions that actually address needs of the stakeholders. So there are some SLA research questions which are fascinating to us, but they're not really of relevance to the learner or the teacher. They don't foster something they want to improve. So you really need to focus your research questions. But there's plenty, like on feedback. So we said, does immediate scaffolded feedback on form during homework improve learning? That was the first research question. And everyone should use the system. Because otherwise, if you're not letting everyone use the system, you cannot, for example, do within class randomization. And then you'll get it's clear you'll get a multimedia effect because kids will want to use the system. There's a spike in interest because of a new tool, but you're not actually testing what you're testing. So everyone uses the system. But then the RCT, the randomized controlled trial, needs to then balance. So here you see the group A is control in theme 1, the language means there. So, but language means, I mean sprachliche Mittel. So I call them language means because they're both grammar, lexis, and the stuff in between, phraseology. So language means is my word for the language substance you need to get something done when you want to use language. And the control intervention here then is intervention control, and there is control intervention, and there is intervention control. And they write 2 class tests per half year, so this is a full year. So that means every student for each Halbjahr, for each half year, benefits in terms of the grade if the system works, right? You could, of course, say, I don't know, I have a hypothesis, it's research after all, but that would not, I think I would consider that unethical to disadvantage some children. So let's zoom in to one of these phases that I'll briefly talk about that Cordula mentioned, comparatives, conditionals, relative clauses. There were 205 students who completed the pre and post test, and there's no change in the teaching. The only thing that's different is kids use this electronic workbook instead of the paper workbook. And did I already mention that? No, I skipped over it. I shouldn't have. Here, there, everyone received feedback on meaning, on orthography, and default feedback, like if they write, there's a war going on, and then you say, sorry, this is not what I'm expecting. That's default feedback. It's kind of out of task context. We don't know what the misconception is, or in this case, actually, correct conception, but not on task. Okay, so that means everyone benefits, but who sees which feedback on which grammar thing changes? Okay, here, conditionals, relative clauses, comparatives, which is on the curriculum. And then this is a simple thing. I'll show you a bit more in a second. In the beginning, in the pre-test, which is extra, and they complain about it, because kids don't like to be tested on things that they haven't done yet, right? So that's different in school. Usually you have a test after you've done something. Okay, but so you see they're not different. These are the 95% confidence intervals. And in the end, the group that saw the scaffolding feedback, that's the only difference, was better in the post-test. Then, this is the other Michael Long paper, which I thought was really amazing. I discovered it after a while. He rightly points out, if we conduct research in classroom, we can only conduct what happens in the input here, but then stuff happens. We have to deduce on what happened here because we're not there. And then we measure this. In the middle, we've got a black box. And that's what's different now. Because this loss of control when conducting research in the authentic school context, we can actually use learning analytics of what did they do in the system. So 2 examples. First, there's the difference between as randomized and as treated. Did kids who would have gotten the feedback had they written something that their system would be able to provide feedback on, did they actually do it? Right? We don't know. They could have just been demotivated or whatever, or their guinea pig died and they didn't want to do homework that week, right? I mean, all kind of factors. So what we then tried is, did the people did they actually hear this group? There's grammar 1 feedback, grammar 2, and you see blue, red. What is that? Ah, that's intervention. Oh yeah, right. So the grammar themes in theme 1, that was the one group, the other saw that. But would there have been feedback, but the system withheld it? And that's what you see on the right-hand side. And the answer is yes. Look at the right-hand side. That's the hidden feedback. That's the feedback the system didn't show them, but would have shown them had they been in the right group. So indeed, people produced something, but just didn't receive feedback on it, and that caused the effect. So we know for sure, yes, they were randomized this way, feedback given, not feedback given, and the treatment resulted from that randomization. So they actually saw the feedback, or they would have seen the feedback had they been in the other group. So really the withholding of the feedback, not the different behavior with the system. Okay, another aspect, learning analytics on for which learners was the feedback effective. And that's where I think you can see the benefit. A teacher standing in front of a class, they know something, longitudinal modeling of the learners, but what activity now is causing cognitive activation for which learners and where do they need to provide more scaffolding? So this was with Bronson Hui, Björn Rutzewitz, and me. So we looked at different performances, uses of the system, and we found you can look at how often did they interact with the system, what type of activities, was their uptake of the feedback, all these kind of things. And we clustered learners into, in this case, it turned out accuracy focus of students. So how many of the items were filled out correctly by the students, not left empty, answered correctly at first try, because do they do it right away or do they need feedback? And we looked at when did they work on it and when did they submit their homework, because you have to press a button and say, I'm done. And it turns out that scaffolded feedback has the biggest effect for students who systematically attempt to solve the exercise correctly. So they are trying to get it right. They seem to be motivated, but we didn't measure that. And they submit later than their peers. So take a look at this. This is the effect we saw earlier. The red group is different from the blue group. These are the late submitters, high accuracy focus. So students who, when they submitted, they considered the feedback, they tried to get it right, they worked towards a goal. And you may ask yourself, what about the others? If they work with the system, what does it mean? Accuracy focus. Well, there's others who are compared to swimming. If you can't swim and I push you into the end of the pool, are you going to move your arms? Yes, frantically. Are you going to sink? Possibly. But a lot of effort for not succeeding in doing what you wanted to do. So we found lots of students who worked with the system, didn't understand the feedback, were not developmentally ready. And then they couldn't develop because a lot of activity doesn't translate to a lot of learning success if you're not ready to do what you're trying to do. Okay, and so you can see up here, that is not significant. So the people who basically just want to get it done, let's get it done. submit early, they don't benefit from feedback, very likely because they don't read it, but we don't see it because they do it at home. I should have mentioned that earlier. So workbook activity was done at home. Or in individualized study, they have also afternoon slot sometimes. Okay, now first step towards task. Does it actually translate to their free production? And I can go through that quickly because if you were interested in it, you already saw a Kodash talk on it, but I'll tell you. So the question is, if you did well on the post-test, does it speak for your ability to use it in free production? Here's something where, if now that I know a bit more about tasks, I would not consider this a genuine task because it should be embedded. You write a postcard. It's a functional. Where here just say write about your holidays. Yeah, sure. I can also tie my shoelaces. But the idea is there was at least an attempt to see whether in free production, where we don't mention what the grammar is, but we functionally entice students, do they actually use it? And so we found out that indeed, when you look at the occurrences of the target language forms from the practice and the learner writing, yes, they do use it more if they had a higher post-test. That means practice helps you use what you practiced. One problem is not all tasks result in elicit the language means we wanted to look at, and there it could be because of the task or because the kids were not ready. Conditional clauses were much less elicited, so we need to look at that. Yeah, that's kind of showing you the correlation. And so they're all over the place, yes, but down here you can see the post-test score, if it goes up, then the number of occurrences in the writing goes up as well. Okay, but now comes actually the more fun part, because remember the game between gamification and task. So my empirical educational science friends tell me you need to motivate the kids. You can choose your avatar, and there's Yeti, and it shows you, hey, 6 corrected first try, 2 correct after feedback, you're great. And then you can actually party with him or her. And here, okay, I have to, so this guy, there's a little where he then celebrates their stars flying. And then the kids were, of course, comparing, how does your avatar celebrate? And he celebrates differently depending on how well you did it, right? Depending on the degree of, so they were continuously, so this really was motivating. And then we did the functional thing. We said, practice should have a purpose. It's a pre-task activity. There should be a task, otherwise it's just, drill and kill. So I'll show you this more. So we said the first thing is there needs to be a functional goal. Up here, for example, they talked about school rules, write rules for your perfect boarding school. And this in particular, when one rule that they like to discuss is mobile phone use. So in 2 weeks, we're going to meet and we're going to discuss the new rules for using mobile phones in schools. Should we be allowed to use our mobile phones or not? Please prepare. And then they log into the system, and then there's these language means, comparatives, and all kind of language means that are basically step by step, and these bars don't show, did you do the exercise bit? Do you master this? So first, here are the language means, that what we would, now that I've talked to Mariah, we would call task essential language means. And then they are shown, how well do you master this? Not how many exercises did you do, were they correct or not, but what does the system think you can do by yourself, corrected try, with help, so zone of proximal development, or not done at all. And then they have ready to go-ness. So these are 7th graders, and they needed a clear signal. So whenever something has been acquired, we wanted to tell them, hey, you're ready to go. And indeed, the teachers later on told us that some kids who never speak up, this boy never speaks up, but then the teacher asked, oh, great, you participated. Well, the system said I could do it. Right? So these are kids who practice with it and then are sure that they can rely on their ability to use these forms and then participate in class. And yeah, then we also made the trophies, because if kids don't use certain forms, they fall by the wayside. Delayed post-tests very often show that what you used to be able to do at one point, you no longer do. So these trophies collect dust. And this is not, you don't have to do exercises on this, but if the form doesn't appear in something you did in another exercise, then it starts gathering dust, and then the system again gives you activities when you press, I want more practice. All right, so now what do you think? We went full year study, another full year randomized controlled field study, 847 students, 36 classes, all 7th grade high school. And there's a broad range of analysis. And again, if you love doing statistics, also come and talk to me, because we have all this data, 4 randomized controlled field studies, and so far we've published something like 2 papers, because there's just so much data that you need to get through and ask which research question, which kind of method. So, structural equation modeling and kind of, if you like these kind of things, let me know, and we have data for you. And also, there is not just the stuff I'm showing you here, but Torben Schmidt, Diana Pilimos, and Caroline Caro, they also did videography in classrooms to actually see, is this really just the teacher report, or is it what's happening in the class? Also, there will be results on that published soon. Pilimos, so Diana just published one thing in systems coming out now. Okay, we here want to ask, how about the gains for the task-based group, task-organized practice, or gamified? Well, it turns out that at first, motivational feedback was effective. Celebrating with the avatar for a couple of weeks really engaged people. And then it really dramatically had a negative impact. Because it basically means you take time away from doing what you're doing, you're just celebrating with the avatar, and you're optimizing celebration, you're not optimizing mastery. Because you celebrate when you get an exercise right. Whereas task-oriented dashboard resulted in significantly higher learning gains compared to the original dashboard. Why? Because the kids know why they're learning. They want to learn this because then they can participate in class. All the class activities were, all tasks were in class because we didn't automate these. These were real interactions, real spoken language, written language. And so that was always preparing for class in the system. But you could, of course, also do something in the system. Okay, so that, and also I have to tell you, a system that, the group that had both, the motivational feedback and the gamification and task-based, the task-based effect went away. So if you have extrinsic, this kind of gamified collect coins, they forget why it is that they're actually doing the homework, right? That's scary a bit because it means you really shouldn't combine, it won't be bad, but they like it. No, it will hurt you because they forget what it is they're trying to learn. All right, so that means first point here was then, yes, combining a kind of more skill acquisition theory type approach at the pre-task phase, organizing it towards tasks may help us structure also in terms of individual differences. We now can take into account little video game. There's another study that I won't be able to tell you about. Little video game in 2 minutes, we have working memory measures from the ADHS research originally that we can take into account in how complex the next activity will be, the next learning activity. So we can fully individualize the sequencing of materials in the pre-task phase. Okay, now on to the next thing where I realized, how about something that isn't that tightly connected to the curriculum, but to the learner's interest? The learner's interest is, for example, I want to read a book, Harry Potter. If you ever try to read Harry Potter, that's a book that's interesting to young students and older students and adults, but the language is actually pretty complicated. So how do you manage? So if you're supposed to have 98 or 95% of the words, you can't read it. It means stuff you're interested in, you can't read. But can't we help kids? Yeah, sure, we can give them pre-chewed readers, pre-boiled, where they have annotated them. But, I'm not even sure Harry Potter has a version for, A2 learners of English. But if it did, it would be a big book, lots of annotations, and then for whom. So the idea was, let's basically generate the learning activities for the vocabulary based on who you are and based on what book you want to read. So it's an AI system with Santi Hemant, his name is Hemant Santi Ponusami, and we automatically derive the lexical semantic graph and introduce the central words first, so that then through spreading activation, you can actually have a more efficient exploration of the conceptual space. So that's the idea. So what we do is we take the book, or books, we tried it with different books, and then we derive first all the word families. So this is lexical semantic, so it's, there's a technique called distributional semantics. So we can, through lots of data, basically derive the nature of word and its relation in semantic terms to other words. And that's what we use here. And then we can, for example, this is the result here, Game of Thrones. It actually groups these names correctly together, right? So keep in mind that this is not just English, it is a book. So there are semantic relations that are not established by English, but by the book. But then there's other things about, family relations. Up here, and also these are derived from the book. So distribution semantics kind of works as an approximation. It's the way it works is you should judge a word by the company it keeps, was first slogan. So you don't know who is an SLA specialist with, say, language testing in this conference, but Luke Harding stands over there and he has a gang of people around him. Well, they're probably also language testers, right? So the idea is you hang out with people who you're similar to. It's not always true, but in language it works. Okay. So then what do we do with it? Well, then we extract sentences from the book you want to read. So you're actually interested in this. And they are in the same semantic domain, because otherwise there's a lexical semantic disambiguation challenge. For example, here, Robert looked at Ned and scowled at his silence, or he held back against his cushions and scowled at her, and so on. Aria scowled. And then you can choose between frowned, stared, growled, and scowled. And because we give you multiple options, this multi-gap activity with Thorsten Sesch invented, we can basically reduce the number of words, even though they're semantically similar, so that you then really have to acquire the word by being exposed to it in context. So that's the idea. Then we activate the words you've seen, and the words you couldn't do correctly, we deactivate, and that spreads through the network. And then we use a notion called network centrality, so that you first learn the words that help you learn a lot of other words in that kind of semantic relationship. All right, so the technical stuff we can do, we've done it. And we also have simulated learners with different proficiency levels and different accuracy levels, a typical computer science paper. So this was published, actually got in BEA the Best Paper Award a couple of years ago, but we never tried it with relearners. So again, if you would like to do a study on this, incidental, we've got an intensive reading program. Let me know, and we can do it. If you want to do it for French or Spanish, I'll be happy to try to find somebody. We did it for German and English, but if you want to do it for another language, we'll work on it, but I'd love to try this out in real life schools. But we then, for that, need an intensive reading program so that people read enough so that we can see whether it makes a difference to speed things up. What we think cognitively, psychology, it should work, but hey, who knows about real life teaching? Okay, so please contact me afterwards. So you can see I'm turning this into an advertisement, but I really mean it. It's sad. Very few people want to do this interface stuff because you either do this or that. Okay, last thing, dialogue. So at this point of preparing the talk, I thought, okay, but it's pre-task, and again, the task is in class, okay. And then it's an input task, but again, we don't actually model the reading, we model the preparation for the reading. Couldn't I also do the task in the system? Sure, yeah, dialogue, interactive task, directed dialogue are modeled. Serge Bibau has written plenty of papers even on surveying dialogue-based call. And there's, a lot of people in the audience who've worked in this direction. Point out, it can be closed domain, open, can be retrieval, genitive. But let's then actually look at 3 very different approaches that I think are really putting a flashlight on different ways of doing it. This was an amazing dissertation. Ken Peterson, he by himself developed the entire system, did the entire study, and compared human interaction. Goal is question acquisition in English. Underlying theoretical framework was Pieneman-Johnston framework of the developmental sequences for question acquisition, and then compared human interaction in information gap activities with human-computer dialogues, where he had designed the entire system with lots of different information gaps, and he had a friend who's a graphic artist. And if you ever need great stimuli, contact him, or contact me, and I'll try to find him. He's kind of in industry, as I said, testing industry. And so amazing, very motivating, cool pictures. Okay, so and then here you can, he intentionally did not use an avatar that looked more, could say, well, this was 2010. But no, it wasn't 2010. It was actually because of the uncanny valley effect. So if you have an avatar that looks too human, then people find it scary. And he intentionally abstracted away from this being a real teacher to this stick figure. Thanks. The study you conducted already back then, and that's in his dissertation, that's publicly available, is 56 ESL at public high schools, Washington, and he had novice and intermediate learners and compared human-computer, human-human. Human-human was spoken, human-computer at the time was written. ASR wouldn't have done that at the time, and a control. And the intervention was only 3 times 30 minutes, so whereas we before talked about full year studies. And the human interlocutor was always him to make sure that there's no interlocutor effect. And the amazing thing was he could show that both in the human-computer and the human-human human-computer written interaction, human-human oral interaction, you could observe the exact same sequence along the acquisition sequences for question acquisition for English discussed in Pienemann and Johnston. So as I said, it's an amazing dissertation. Have a look at it. And both were much better than control. So it's not that they were the same and everything was the same, but there was a learning effect that it was according to the acquisition sequence, and human-human and human-computer interaction supported the same learning outcome. Okay, then now, time moves on. We can do spoken language discussion, and in the work by Elizabeth Baer and Xiaobin Chen, they've worked together with Mariah on a spoken language dialogue task in a system called ISLA. And the idea there was, let's not invest our energy in technology, let's just reuse technology, like some other talks you've seen here. Here they used Amazon Transcribe for speech recognition, Amazon Lex for the rule-based task implementation. And the idea then is, let's balance the technical capabilities with what we want to foster, curricular demands, pedagogical needs, and student interests. And they came up, Elizabeth came up with this kind of balance together with Mariah and colleagues on having both unfocused and focused tasks. Focused task, because then you can cover some things that are required by the curriculum. Unfocused, because it's likely that they will use language that they're supposed to practice. And they are tuned, different from other tasks, to children. Because if you say, you know, booking a conference trip, and you try to do that with 7th graders, they look at you and say, huh? Because they never book conference trips, right? So then there's the goals is both develop language and intercultural competence, which is something you may have heard Elizabeth's talk on. If not, you know, talk to her. She has a cool talk on this as well. There was a pilot already, which is published in Baer et al. 2024, which shows the iterative development of the system that's needed for this. You do not get a system doing what you want pedagogically just out of the box. You have to iteratively talk to your task experts, and then you can do it. And the currently ongoing study then will show kind of language, in particular the intercultural outcomes that you get out of such a system. So what you can see here is it's very concrete. Why did I need spoken language? Well, because these are supposed to be spoken language discussions about buying a birthday gift, which is much more natural than if you're typing something into a system. Okay, very briefly, splash screen. That's kind of an introduction. Then there's a kind of preparation phase. You show an example. Then you have the speaking activity, and then you get a record of your interaction. Okay, but as I said, watch out for the study. It's going to come out next year. Currently ongoing data collection. Okay, last thing. There is ChatGPT out there, and I said initially it doesn't do the job by itself, but can't we build something on top of it? And the answer is, of course, yes. Closed domain has the downside that, yes, you can do what you want, but the learner has to do what you want, right? Learners don't want to have your dialogue. Learners want to do their dialogue. They want to write what they want to write. They want to say what they want to say, and the system should adapt to it. Closed domain, it's the teachers in control. Let's give the learners more control. But I'm a very skeptic. There's this data-driven approach where kind of let the learner explore. Well, but we also have curricular goals. So how do we put some kind of guidance? And there the idea is input enrichment. Can't we actually extend large language models, which are open domain, support open domain dialogue, in such a way that it integrates what we know from SLA, input enrichment, input enhancement. So then the learners interacting with the system will align, another favorite term of Mariah, will align with the language that is used by the bot. You know, it's like, what did I say? You can identify the meaning of a word by the other words that hang out with it, you know, or in this case, we had the language testers, they like to hang out together. So the idea is, let's make sure people hang out with the right crowd, right? Kids should hang out with the language they should meet. Okay, so the idea is here, just a simple screenshot type thing. Hey, what's your favorite Netflix show? So these are real dialogues from a dialogue database. My favorite Netflix show is Stranger Things. Oh, it's awesome. I love the suspense. Did you expect the thing, the end of the first season? Oh, no, I think they aim for the most tragic end. So here, it's just highlighting, you know, superlatives. And then it shows uptake by the student. You know, it's a fake example. I made this up, or actually, Dominic made this up, my student. They had the most creative screenwriters. So this is then our setup. We always have a context up here, which we get from a huge dialogue database to be able to try out the technology. So we didn't try this with real students. We tried it with dialogues that were written by humans. So it's real dialogues, but it's not students. Then we tell the system here, demonstrate these grammar skills. We call them grammar skills rather than language means. And for example, here, these are 627 and 68. These are the grammar skills from the English grammar profile. Would not have ext or superlative the most. And then the system is supposed to offer. I would not have watched it either then. I feel like they intended the most tragic end. And then the student again shows uptake or not. And their skill meter here, this thing is a skill meter in a sense, goes up in these skills. Okay, so that's the idea. Can we tickle large language models so that they produce more of the language that we think is developmentally proximal according to the English profile characterization of production in, so English profile is a massive effort where they empirically studied what developed when 1,222 language constructs organized that way. Okay. So as source for the dialogues, for the beginning, we use daily dialogue, dialogue sum, and wizard of Wikipedia, which are data sets. We took a bunch of grammar targets from the English grammar profile, and then we implemented different approaches, prompting, fine-tuning. So this is technical stuff, it's kind of boring. You basically have guided decoding. There's different ways you can tickle large language models. You can open the large language model and then do another kind of interpretation, guided decoding or hybrid models. Standard pre-trained language models, GPT, Llama, and then we evaluated by looking at did what the system produced actually realize the language we wanted, and then there's an automated dialogue quality assessment approach by Mendoza et al. Content richness, grammatical correctness, distinctiveness, appropriateness, and relevance are automatically graded, and this is what we found. So you can see here on the left-hand side, if you try to do it with the blue, it's only in 40% of the cases can you get GPT 3.5 with different ways of prompting to realize these different grammatical means, which should be realizable in the context of that dialogue. If you take Llama, it's similar, but it's open. And then look at this jump from green to red. The red up there is Llama decoding. So if you have a computer science friend who tickles the large language models for you in such a way that already the decoding layer and encoding layer, and the decoding layer then is special in putting priority on the language means, then you get much better output. So that means it's good to hang out with some computer scientists who help you get your SLA into the data. That's basically the story. However, keep in mind that if you overdo it, if you only then later on hang out with computer scientists, you have a problem, because then you're purple and you get the best performance in terms of the structures. But look at this. This is now here appropriateness, language appropriateness, way down. The more you enforce it to use the language you want, the less the quality in terms of grammar, in terms of coherence, and so on. So there's a trade-off. Kind of in artificially inflating pedagogical goals, you also decrease the fluency, coherence, and so on. Okay, so that's the story here. So outlook, before I wrap up. This is Dominic, is a great student, Dominic Landorf. He then unfortunately decided to do his PhD on self-regulation. And I really had some very bad days, was really sad. Because, so I wished we could push this right now further. So it's published, it's gonna come out in NAACL, the North American Association of Computational Linguistics, the proceedings, the work I just presented. But you have to keep in mind it's just one aspect. I'm just showing you it is worth not taking technology just off the rack, create the technology that does what you need to get done, and it won't happen automatically. You really need this interdisciplinary collaborations. But now the task of everyone here in the room is to really then ask, when is exposure sufficient, implicit, incidental exposure alignment, and when, for which student do we actually need to do incidental focus on form, right? These are two different approaches. You could enrich it more, you could enhance it more, or you could make more explicit practice, or you could make more incidental focus on form on the productions rather than on the input side. But this now becomes investigatable, right? With such a system, you in principle could now do a PhD on the balance for which students is which input enhancement leading to alignment and possibly learning, possibly only alignment, better, and for which students and forms is it better to do this with incidental focus on form in a task. You then can also integrate different variables. Linguistic complexity, cognitive variables, motivational variables can be measured in a classroom setting. And we indeed have data, if you're interested in that full year study mostly unanalyzed because the main PhD student there, his wife had a child, and so we then have not yet analyzed this adaptivity. But it's full cognitive variables, working memory capacity every time before students did something. Full year study with, I think, 600 kids for the entire curriculum. So what is the ZPD? Well, we have to look at it. And then AI to teach is something that was very dear to my heart in the last 4 years now. AI to teach. If you want to interface individual instruction, individual support by systems with the teacher, you need to inform the teacher. There's no way you can take adaptivity out of the hand of the teacher and then expect to him or her to still, conduct the orchestra. You need to know who can play the first violin. You need to know all these kind of teacher-guided, teacher-orchestrated classroom will only work if there's an interface, dashboards, and if you train the teachers. Why is input enrichment or input enhancement, why is that an effective method for whom? They don't know, German English teachers don't know that. Okay, so conclusion. I think there indeed is a range of opportunities for task-based leveraging of technology, which is the topic of this conference. And I've shown you just 3 flashlights. You can do rule-based, traditional AI or generative AI, and you can link it in different ways to TBLT. Link individual practice in a tutoring system as pre-task activities to task-supported classrooms. You can support learners in individually selecting input and scaffold their learning by helping them acquire enough lexical material so that they can succeed in their task intent. And you can support interactive dialogues, but a lot of work there remains. How about feedback? How about enhancements? There's a lot of work to be done, plenty of dissertations, and I'd love to do more work in this. But the cautionary tale I want to end with is do not believe the story that they tell you in Didacta, for example. They tell you adaptivity is solved. They tell you we've got a tool that will support scaffold your learning. There's no research backing it up at all. So generative AI as such is explicitly and only trained to be language imposter. It's optimized only to produce fluent language. The language generated is fictional, like a film. Every character in this film is fictional. Any resemblance to insight and SLA didactic assessment is purely coincidental, right? You can say, oh, but look, it acts as though it's a tutor. But no, it's not. It just uses language that somebody in a tutoring context has used. All right, so to obtain reliable technology, we really must design and develop it to do what we want it to do based on the expertise in the room. So I much look forward to further discussions. Okay, well, let me see if there's some.
Yes, sorry. Questions, comments? Oh, you want me to throw?
Woo.
Okay, thanks for that amazing talk. It was really impressive, the breadth of knowledge that you have on all different aspects of the field.
Well, I used Mariah, remember? Every question I had, I could ask her.
My question is, moving forward, I also really appreciated the proactive approach of how we can use AI and not be passively waiting. My question is, what is the potential role for teachers in all of this? Because you have this beautiful design of how we could incorporate AI, and what's the role of the teacher? Because I think they also have a lot of expertise to bring to the design and the interpretation of AI in classroom
Yeah,
context.
very good question. That's in a sense here, this last thing that I actually added late, this interface to the teacher. It's something I didn't think of when we did the first tutoring system. I didn't think of the teacher. I just thought of the student. But then the student is an explicit institutional, is in the context that's formal learning. And I admit it's just one part, but I do believe in solving the problems of this formal learning setting schools. And then if you do it with teachers and there's this loss of control, I've had parents call me furiously saying, it used to be that before the class exam, I knew whether my kid could do it. Now with this stupid feedback, I don't know anymore. Because it's scaffolding, right? The system is supporting the child in doing something. Before, it was parental guidance. But we know that this is unjust, right? I mean, parents who don't do it, then the kids can't learn it. So it's not, the solution is not to stop the system, but to make the system transparent in aggregated ways. I first showed teacher learning trajectories. They said, you've got to be kidding me. I have a class in 5 minutes and I have 26 kids in this. Tell me what I need to know. So then we developed together with a woman called Leona Colling, different teacher dashboards, which either focus on how are we advancing in the class towards the curricular goal, and which students groups have which problems, so internal differentiation, so that you then also, and you can, if you want to go at the individual level, for example, an interview with the parents, then you can go into that. But the first thing is what I call actionable information. The teacher needs to have access to the information so that if I now conduct the orchestra, I know that I have people practice, their part so that it's worthwhile doing it together, or do I need to do first the violins, then the violas, then the cellos, right? A teacher has the chance of deciding how much differentiation is possible and necessary. And for me, really, the vision of labor then is everything that is preparatory, everything that facilitates better task execution and communication in the classroom, and all the social. When people are there, you should make use of the people. And therefore, I think the teacher is, for me, is always the person, conducting, and you still shape the piece of music. Tasks still play a role. If you play different music, you entice different abilities. But without people having practiced first, you can't shape it in the same way. So for me, technology should take care of supporting different learners on trajectories so that they can then participate more in a joint classroom.
Thank you, Detmar, for the information-intensive talk. I really enjoyed it. I just have some difficulty framing it within the TSLT, task-supported framework. On the sixth slide, number 6, that's a long way, sorry. So during the procedure, was there any explicit instruction before all these things, the practice?
Yeah, so that's perhaps what's really different from a lot of studies we've seen. I've seen amazing studies here, but here, this was not originally designed, let's do a study. Our approach was, let's support the teaching and learning. And so we did not tell the teachers at all what to do. We only step-by-step introduced, so here, you're using the workbook, right? Why don't you use this electronic version of the workbook? It also provides feedback. So we did not tell the teachers what to do. Even in the AI to teach, we're not harmonizing the teaching of the teachers who participate. So we had 50 in the AI to teach study. We have 50 teachers who participate in a six-day spread out over the school year teacher training, so in-service teacher training, where we then had also 2 online sessions where we looked at what do they do with the class. But also there, it's up to the teachers what they do. We only provide information. We tell them about their input, output, noticing. We tell them about tools that foster it, but we do not control. These are studies that are really not controlled like an experiment. They are what happens in real life when you change some variables. So we say, these kids internally get this feedback, these kids get that. These kids get that dashboard, these kids get that. And we typically try to do it within class randomization, because when they use it at home, then the kids don't look at, they did talk about the avatars, so that was a bit difficult. So the avatars we actually had to do not within class, but across class randomization. But so we do not actually tell teachers what to do. We just change one variable in what they do.
Great. So in that case, I'm wondering why we have practice and tasks separately, like from practice to task, because it brings to my mind something like PPP, where there is presentation, controlled practice, and then presentation. But if it is TSLT, the tasks are actually practice. So practice happens with tasks.
Yeah. So that is, again, since we're starting from schools, they have a textbook. And this textbook has, the way they understand pre-task activities is that they have exercises. And so they basically, this kind of transitioning and pre-chewing some of the language means, that is, you're right, it could be more PPP. In a sense, these are just labels. Are you Protestant, Catholic? It's all, ultimately it's doing it right. I follow the religion of let's do it right. And so it's true that kind of pure task focus would be difficult. This is not a pure task-oriented, task-based classroom, but it's a real-life classroom, which we try to improve by linking functional language use, tasks that people actually perform, communicative tasks and things that are relevant for things outside of language. And we try to combine it with the way school in Germany is structured. There's homework, there's practice activities. So let's make them useful for functional language use, right? So I don't, since the good thing is in these kind of religious discussions, I always say, hey, I'm just a computational linguist.
I think that has been a wonderful closing word. Thank you, Detmar, so much. Thanks, everyone.
You want this one? I used the box.
Want to say anything after me or no? Oh, pictures. All right, we have everyone, just one more minute of your time. This is